Hey, welcome back to part 5 in the series of building this web page. Glad to see you're not scared. Came back for more. We're going to continue working on this document that we've already started. If you are catching us in the middle of all this, there are 4 preceding videos to this one, which basically allowed us to build this from the ground up to reach this level. I invite you to go check those out if you're coming in out of the cold and not sure what to do. But what we're going to be doing next is basically formatting areas down here and on the right sidebar so that our document will start resembling this mock-up that we've been working from, and it becomes a lot closer to this than what we have right now, which is here. What we're going to tackle next is the story area. And we already have the basic structure in place. We have our heading, we have our little subheading over here, we have some blurb text, and we're going to have to create a button also for read more. This isn't a form button. Form buttons are different. We'll look at those when we get to this sidebar area over here. But for now, let's focus on this main content area. Now, it looks very intimidating, but ultimately, web stuff, you're designing stuff so that you can repeat it over and over and over again without having to constantly redesign things. So what we're doing is we're looking to create a standard recipe over here. For example, heading 1, that's already done. We've already defined our headings with the right typography. Here's a heading 2. Basically what we want to do is create the structure here so that the image aligns left and everything falls into place. We do it once, we get it right, and once we're happy with it, then it's just a question of copying and pasting, and just swapping out the text because everything else structurally has already been done. Let's take a look at what needs to get done here. So I'm in design view right now, which doesn't really accurately reflect the state of the document. I'm going to switch to live view, which gives me a nicer view here. So yeah, there's my headline. There's my subheading. There's some text. And I'm going to switch back to design view because it's easier to work in that. And what I'm going to do next is study the HTML if needed. So, select your text here and it highlights it in the code. So let's take a look at what's cooking in this area here. We have a new section, and that's the main content box. That's where all this stuff is sitting. If I do that, there you go. It's basically this container over here, the main section box, as we can see. Contains all the other elements, heading 1, the heading 3, the div container for your content, and we're going to be working within this section to format this story and create additional ones. So let's start with by looking at that mock-up again. So what we want to do is create food, the world's most expensive desserts. Now, to save you from some typing, you can probably grab all this text from the Photoshop file, right? So if you've seen the previous exercise and you opened up the Photoshop file, you can select the text tool over here, click and drag, just click OK. We don't care about font substitution. We just want the text. So you can grab that text here, copy, Alt-Tab back to your Dreamweaver file, and this would be your subheading. Replace it, just paste, there you go. This one was called food. Oops, all caps. And let's refer back to our mock-up one more time. There it is. So food, there's a horizontal line separating it, and then the subheading. So what we want to do here is press enter and insert some HTML, and from this big old list we want to choose a horizontal rule. Okay, so it's a bit of a ways down. I'll just leave this window open so you can see how to get there. You click on insert in the menu, then you click on HTML, then you go all the way down here, fourth from the bottom, horizontal rule. Now when you click there, all that work to get this tiny little tag called HR. I guess in the future now you know it's a lot easier to just type in HR. You might as well give this a class while you're at it so you can format it later on. We'll call this class story line. No, story separator. Yeah, keep it simple. Storyline. We'll get it. It's not that complex of a document, so leave that there. So here's our horizontal rule. If there's any extra space in there, you can delete it. There you go. Oops. Be careful when you're pressing delete sometimes. Like, look what happens. This right now is an H3, but if I click delete, Dreamweaver wants to convert it into a paragraph. Why? Well, it's just one of those quirks of Dreamweaver. You might want to just prefer to backspace. There you go. So everything moves up without changing. Dreamweaver quirks, you're going to have to get used to them. It's part of the lifestyle. So we have our basic structure here. We have some content. Your content goes here. Use lorem ipsum. Feel free to add images. So where do we get lorem ipsum? There are quite a few places on the web where you can just get lorem ipsum. And what is lorem ipsum? It's basically placeholder text. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You know, in the graphic design tradition, basically you add some Latin text in there that doesn't really mean anything. But I usually pick mine up at lipsum.com. You can go here for a little description of why. And there's a little tool down here on the right where you can just say, okay, give me one paragraph, generate, and there you go. So you can grab your little blurb text over here. That's enough there. Go back to your document, and whether it's in your code or in your window over here, just replace it. There you go. So you end up with a little blurb text that doesn't really say anything, but gives you something to work with. We also want to insert an image according to our mockup, right? So we have our subheading, we have some text. To the left, we have an image. So to insert an image in that area, you want to make sure your cursor is like right there in the front. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see. You know, insert your cursor right in front of the lorem ipsum there. Make sure you got it right. If you're not really sure, you can always double check in the code area. And now what you want to do is basically go to Insert, Image, and find the appropriate image in your Assets folder. Images, yeah. So this one, we'll start with ice cream. Okay. There you go. So now that's inserted, you can see that it's not lining up properly, that it's a little off, right? So there's a couple of things you can do here. You can create a class for this particular image, which then you can assign to the other image as well, and change some of those attributes so that it fits into the content a bit more easily. So with this image, I think I'm going to create a new class. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that, go to CSS Designer, make sure my styles.css is selected, and let's see if I click on plus. No, that's not what I wanted. So yeah, my mistake. Rather than choose the little plus icon over here, what we're going to do is create a custom class. So with your image selected, you're going to right-click the image, and you'll see CSS styles over here, and it allows you to attach a new CSS style to this image. Click there, and we're going to assign a class for this particular image, which can be assigned to other ones as well. We'll call it article thumbnail. Okay. Article thumbnail, it's going to create a new class, and we want it to be created in our styles.css file. Very important that we keep all our CSS in one place, otherwise we'll be jumping around, never knowing for sure where our stuff is being getting our styling properties from. So always make sure you're working with all your styles in one place. There you go. And once you click OK, you'll be presented with this window here, which allows you to make some quick adjustments right away to this particular element without going through the whole CSS designer. So in this particular case, really, there's only a couple of things we need to change. We want this aligned towards the left so that the text wraps around it. So that's under float. So we go to box in the section over here, and we choose float. This is going to float left. The other thing we want to change is a bit of a margin. We don't want our text stuck right up against this element right here. So in terms of margin, you know, we want it lined up on the left with the text, but we don't want it on the right or the bottom to have text stuck on it. So instead of same for all, we're going to change only the right. We're going to add maybe 15 pixels worth of margin. And at the bottom, we're going to add 15 pixels worth of margin. We don't really need to do anything else. You'll notice this image has an orange line around it. That's because we exported it from Photoshop with the orange line. If you cropped it a bit tighter and you didn't have a thin line around it, now is a good time to add that extra border. And if you want to add an extra border around it, that's fine too. You know, feel free to add that extra border here. But that's all we need to do for now. And if you click apply, you'll see right away, after you click OK, I guess, sorry, one last step, we need to now assign that class we just created to this file. So what we do is, with the image selected, go down to our properties bar, and we're looking for article thumbnail. There it is. So if we choose it and we zoom out now, there it is. So we have that nice margin around it. And if you need to make any changes to this, let's say the margin isn't large enough, for example, I don't feel comfortable with the margin under it, I would just switch over to my CSS designer here, look for article thumbnail, and here in the margin where it says 15, I would probably change it to 25. So if I assign that value, we should see, especially in live view, to see the proper changes there. So let's see what that looks like. There you go. Nice. So because we've added some margin down here, the text doesn't even wrap unless there's a lot more of it. So you're not going to get this wacky, you know, one line of text under the image. It looks a bit neater, a bit nicer. And if you feel, you know, you need to bring it down a bit, you can add a bit of margin off the top. We also, you know, if we're looking at this, you know, noticing that our text and the image it's flush against the left side of the window here, which we don't want. So in the main content box, let's take a look. We might want to increase the padding, because the padding will push things inwards as opposed to the margin, which affects only the outside. So with the section main content box selected, we're going to add some padding on the left hand side. And when you're in live view and you select the class, it, you know, highlights it so you know you're working in the right area. So the main content box, we're going to add a little margin of 20px. Very nice. So now we have a bit of breathing room on the left. We might also want to assign just a bit of buffer here on the right as well. So let's add another 20 pixels on the right. There you go. So you can see the little extra space over here. It's just, looks more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. But by doing that, what we ended up doing is increasing the width, the total width of this this box over here. So you have a couple of options. You can either narrow this down over here, or narrow the width of the sidebar because there isn't space enough here for both of them. I'm going to narrow down the navigation bar because I prefer my content to have a nice wide area. So I'll shave. What I'm looking for next is the sidebar container, which I will reduce to how much more do I need to go down? So I'm noticing that my sidebar isn't, reverting back to its original space next to this, and I just remembered why. It's because in our section over here we floated this image towards the left. Now whenever you have these floats, it's important to at some point reset the way things float, because the document, and it's just one of those quirks of HTML and CSS, the floats kind of affect elements that are further down on the page that have no relation to them. So to make sure that float doesn't influence anything else on the page, which right now our sidebar is a victim of, we want to create what's called a clear fix, meaning that we want to reset the float. And to do that, we're going to have to do a bit of a hack. And for now, I'll show you what it looks like in the code. But eventually, what we'll do is, we'll create the class right now while we're here. Okay, so where we want to place that is basically at the end of this area where that float is actually working. So what that means is we want to make sure that it's still within the section, but not in the content area. I know it's very vague, but I'll show you where that is. Switch to design view might make it a bit easier to see. So all this is contained within this div container. So div class equals content. That's great. But now if I want to add this clear fix, the best place for it would be to put it right before the closing tag of this section. All right, so this is my entire section. Here's my heading, here's the horizontal rule, subheading, my content, there's my image, my content ends, and then I have this area right before section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a div container. I'm going to call this clear fix, and it's going to serve one purpose. And before I continue, I'm going to create a new CSS rule right off the bat. So yes, we're going to create a new class called clearfix in my styles.css. Click OK. And this has one job to do. Under box, you're going to find the clear. Drop down, you want to clear both. So basically what this element does is it resets the float so that the rest of the page doesn't get messed up in terms of the layout, and when you insert a new float, it's independent of the previous setting so that things work out nicely. Like I said, it's one of those HTML hacks that everybody hates, but is just part of the process right now until something better comes along. So click OK. Just want to make sure you see what happens in the code when I click OK here. So here in the insertion point, if I click OK, there it is. It's going to insert a div, opening and closing there. And Dreamweaver puts in some placeholder text, which in this particular case we don't really want. We want this thing to be invisible. So what we're going to do is just going to delete that text and just leave in the div tag. So what we're doing here is creating this invisible element that the end user will never see, but performs a certain task, which is to reset the float. It's called the clear fix. It's known by other names as well, but in general, that's really what it does. Just to wrap things up over here, I'm just going to fix this sidebar once and for all. Go back to live view for that. I'm going to choose from our list here the sidebar container, and let's see if we play around with the width. So obviously we have a bit of a bug here, and it helps to keep an eye out on things. And here I am looking at why is this container so large. It turns out that instead of 20 pixels, I added 200 pixels worth of padding there. So you can see that this space is completely out of control. Let me just bring that down to 20 pixels. Thank you, and sanity has now returned. So keep an eye out for little tricks like that. If your layout suddenly goes out of control, stop, take a deep breath, and retrace your steps to figure out what's going on and develop a systematic approach to debugging. We'll do that at the end, of course, to fine-tune our document, but in the middle of work, you have to know why things break. So again, main content box, you can tweak the sidebar container. I'm going to tweak the values here. There you go. So we don't want to go there. Nice, nice. So our document is coming along very, very nicely. We have a template now for our stories. Once you have one, the rest are easy to do. It's copy paste. One last thing before we copy this over. We have our storyline line that we want to format, make orange. So select it, and what you can do now is add the selector, click the little plus button up here, and using the arrow keys, just, storyline is good enough. We don't need all that extra stuff. And really all you want to do here is assign a color to it. Let's see, color, us orange, see if that works. Might want to change that to border. $1px solid. There you go. So we got our line done. To create the 3 subsequent stories as seen in our mock-up, for that, really the fastest way to do this is by going into the code and copying and pasting. So really what we want to do is grab the entire section. Oh, actually no, we can probably just grab from the H1 on downwards. Okay, now it's you don't really need to copy the clear fix tag every single time. Just leave that once at the end before this particular section closes. So I'm just going to copy the story stuff, the headings and the text. So I'll copy that. I'll make some space here where I can now copy the second story. And I'll make more space under that, copy the third story. And if I return to my viewport here, let's see what we're dealing with. There you go. And you can just keep stacking these stories, copy, paste, And really all you're left to do after that is just change the text here. So if you look at our food, there's showbiz. Oops. So this will say showbiz. If we want to change our image, it's fairly straightforward. As we saw earlier, we just select our image. And for this, I'll go to Design View. Let's go to Image and go to your files. And boom, you can target that image right there. And you'll notice some, business like this happening. Don't worry about it. We'll address all that eventually. So the third image was the fashion dinosaur. So you can link to that as well. There you go. For stuff like this, there's one thing we forgot, the button for read more, but that'll be in the next tutorial coming right up after this one. So now is a good time for us to save our work, which you should be doing often, and come back once you've had a coffee or something to part 6 of this series. We're getting very close to finishing now. Things are coming together nicely. We're going to be adding the read more button here. We're going to be looking at the form that's going to go over here, the social sharing icons, the logo, and maybe the tagline text that's up here. And then it's just fine-tuning, and we're 90% done, I'd say. We're getting very close, not much left to do here. So save your work, take a quick break, and come back. I'll see you in part 6 of this series.